The cool Seattle breeze greeted me as I stepped out of the taxi, my heels clicking against the pavement. The familiar sight of our eco friendly home, with its solar panels and lush garden, usually filled me with a sense of peace. But today, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the air was charged with an unsettling energy. I juggled my laptop bag and suitcase, fumbling for my keys. The lock clicked open and I pushed the door, stepping into the foyer. The house was quiet, too quiet. Normally, Lucas would be bounding down the stairs, his laughter filling the air. But today, there was only silence. Lucas? I called out, my voice echoing through the empty hallway. No response. I set my bags down and made my way upstairs, the stairs creaking under my feet. As I reached the top, I noticed that Lucas's bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and froze. The room was unrecognizable. Gone were the vibrant dinosaur posters that Lucas loved, the shelves lined with his favorite books, and the bed where he slept every night. In their place was a luxurious nursery, complete with a crib, rocking chair, and an array of baby accessories. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I was seeing. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the scene before me. This couldn't be happening. I had only been gone for a few days on a business trip, and now it was as if Lucas's entire existence had been erased. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized what had happened. Victoria, my sister, had done this. I turned on my heel and stormed downstairs, my mind racing. Victoria was standing in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea, her pregnant belly prominent under her designer maternity dress. She looked up as I entered, her expression calm and indifferent. "Victoria, what have you done?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. She raised an eyebrow, setting her tea down on the counter. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Emma," she replied, her tone dismissive. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Where are Lucas's things?" I asked, my voice dangerously steady. "His dinosaur collection, his books, his bed? Where is everything?" Victoria sighed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, that old junk. I sold it. It was taking up too much space and I needed the room for the nursery." I stared at her, disbelief and rage warring within me. "You sold his things without even asking me." She shrugged. "It's just stuff, Emma. He'll get over it. Besides, he was outgrowing all that dinosaur crap anyway." I felt a sharp pain in my chest as if someone had physically struck me. Those weren't just things to Lucas. They were his memories, his connection to his father. Daniel had given him that dinosaur collection before he passed away, and it was one of the few tangible reminders Lucas had of him. "Where's Lucas?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria gestured vaguely towards the backyard. "He's outside, sulking. He'll get over it, Emma. Kids are resilient." I pushed past her, making my way to the back door. As I stepped outside, I saw Lucas sitting on the swing, his head down, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I rushed to his side, wrapping my arms around him. "Lucas, sweetheart, what's wrong?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom, where's my bed? Where's my books? Where's my dinosaur from Dad?" His voice cracked, and I felt my own eyes well up with tears. "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered, holding him close. "But I promise you we're going to fix this." I looked back at the house, a cold fury settling over me. Victoria had crossed the line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I stood up, taking Lucas's hand in mine. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go inside and figure this out." As we made our way back into the house, I caught sight of my mother, Elizabeth, standing in the hallway. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. I paused, searching her face for any sign of remorse or understanding. "Mom, did you know about this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Emma, I knew." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if my heart had been physically torn in two. My own mother had betrayed me, had betrayed Lucas. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Then you're just as guilty as Victoria," I said, my voice cold. "And I won't forgive either of you for this." With that, I turned and walked away, Lucas's hand still clasped tightly in mine. I knew what I had to do. I had to fight for my son, for his memories, and for the justice we both deserved. And I wasn't going to stop until. The hotel room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioner. Lucas was curled up on the bed, his eyes closed, but I knew he wasn't asleep. His small body trembled slightly, a telltale sign of the emotional storm raging within him. I sat beside him, stroking his hair gently, trying to offer some comfort amidst the chaos. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator answered, her voice calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I need to report a theft, I said, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside me. My son's belongings have been stolen, and I have reason to believe it was planned in advance. The operator asked for more details, and I provided them, my voice growing stronger with each word. I could feel Lucas's gaze on me, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. I knew I was doing the right thing, no matter how difficult it was. After ending the call, I turned to Lucas, offering him a reassuring smile. We're going to be okay, sweetheart, I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I promise. He nodded, snuggling closer to me. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight as I made another call, this time to Alexander, a renowned attorney known for his tenacity and expertise in family law. I had met him briefly at a business event, and his reputation preceded him. I knew he was the right person to help us navigate this mess. Alexander answered on the second ring, his voice firm and confident. I explained the situation, my voice trembling with emotion. He listened intently, asking clarifying questions and offering words of support. By the end of the call, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a plan, and I was ready to fight. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Alexander in his office. The room was filled with an air of determination, the walls adorned with diplomas and awards that spoke to his success. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and focused. Emma, we have a strong case, he said, flipping open a notebook. The evidence is compelling, and the emotional distress is clear. We can pursue this both criminally and civilly. I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. What are our options? Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. We can file a civil lawsuit for damages and emotional distress. Given the evidence, we can also push for theft charges. Additionally, we can use your financial leverage to put pressure on Victoria and Elizabeth. I thought about the mortgage, the house that I had worked so hard to provide for Lucas. Victoria and Elizabeth had taken advantage of my generosity, and it was time to take control. I want to freeze the mortgage payments, I said, my voice firm. I want to hit them where it hurts. Alexander smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. That's a smart move. It will put them in a difficult position and force them to face the consequences of their actions. With a plan in place, I left Alexander's office feeling a sense of purpose. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head on. Lucas deserved justice, and I was determined to fight for it. Later that day, I visited the bank, speaking with Linda, the bank manager. She listened intently as I explained the situation, her expression sympathetic. After reviewing my account, she confirmed that I had the legal right to freeze the mortgage payments. They'll receive a default notice soon, she said, her voice gentle. If no one picks up the payments, foreclosure proceedings will begin within 60 days. I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. Victoria and Elizabeth had underestimated me, and they were about to face the consequences of their actions. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, seeing Victoria's name flash across it. I let it go to voicemail, a small smile playing on my lips. She was about to realize the extent of her mistake. Back at the hotel, I sat on the bed, watching Lucas as he slept. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I also knew that we would face it together. As I lay down beside him, I couldn't help but reflect on the events of the past few days. The betrayal, the pain, the determination. It was a whirlwind of emotions, but through it all, one thing remained constant: my love for Lucas and my commitment to protecting him. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath as I prepared for the battle ahead. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I was fighting for something worthwhile. And with that knowledge, I drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever challenges the next day would bring. The courtroom was a battleground, and I was ready for the fight. The air was thick with anticipation as I sat beside Alexander, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and determination. Across the aisle, Victoria sat with a smug expression, her arms crossed defiantly over her pregnant belly. Beside her, Elizabeth looked frail and anxious, her eyes darting nervously around the room. The bailiff's voice echoed through the chamber, calling the court to order. The judge entered, his robes billowing slightly as he took his seat. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents before him with a stern expression. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. Alexander stood, his presence commanding and confident. He began to lay out our case, his voice clear and steady, echoing through the silent courtroom. Your Honor, he said, placing a stack of printed screenshots on the evidence table. I present to you Exhibit A, posts from the defense own social media accounts where she brazenly brags about cleaning out junk from my client's home while she was away on business. These so called junk items included valuable collectibles and deeply sentimental items, gifts given to an 8-year-old boy by his late father. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the jury leaned in, their eyes fixed on the damning evidence. Alexander paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in before continuing. Exhibit B, he announced, gesturing to the screen as it flickered to life. Security footage from a local pawn shop, clearly showing the defendant selling these items for personal profit. She did not merely discard them, she profited from their sale, knowing full well the emotional value they held for my client's son. The footage played, showing Victoria smiling as she handed over Lucas's beloved dinosaur collection. The sight of it sent a wave of anger and sadness crashing over me, but I held my composure, my gaze fixed firmly on the judge. Alexander turned to the jury, his voice filled with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not a simple mistake or an accidental oversight. This was a deliberate and calculated act of betrayal. The defendant knew the value of these items, both monetary and sentimental, and chose to disregard it for her own gain. I could see the shift in the room, the disgust on the faces of the jury members as they looked at Victoria. Her smirk faltered, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the reality of her actions finally beginning to dawn on her. Alexander stood tall, his voice firm as he called our first witness. The plaintiff calls Lucas Miller to the stand. The room tensed as Lucas made his way to the witness stand. He looked so small, his shoulders hunched slightly, but his chin was set with determination. He took his seat, his hands folded neatly in his lap, and looked up at the judge with a serious expression that belied his young age. Alexander approached him gently, his voice soft and reassuring. Lucas, can you tell us what was taken from you? Lucas nodded, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. My dinosaurs, my bed, my books. My dad's present, he said, his eyes never leaving the judge's face. They took everything. It wasn't just stuff, it was my memories of my dad, and she threw them away. His voice wobbled slightly, but he pushed on, his courage shining through. I love those dinosaurs because they reminded me of him, and now they're gone. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the courtroom. Victoria snorted derisively, but the jury glared at her, their expressions hardening with each passing moment. Lucas's testimony was powerful, and it was clear that he had won their hearts. Elizabeth started crying softly, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and pleading, but I couldn't bring myself to offer her any comfort. The damage had been done, and the wounds were still raw. Alexander thanked Lucas and turned to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff rests? The judge nodded, and the prosecution began their cross-examination. Victoria's attorney, a sharp-suited man with a slick smile, approached Lucas, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Lucas, aren't you being a little dramatic? He asked, his tone condescending. They're just toys after all. Surely you can understand that your aunt needed the space for her baby? Lucas looked up at him, his eyes filled with a wisdom beyond his years. They weren't just toys, he said firmly. They were my memories, and she didn't need to take them away. The attorney faltered, clearly taken aback by Lucas's composure. He stumbled through a few more questions before giving up, his face flushed with embarrassment. As the jury deliberated, I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each one feeling like an eternity. I looked over at Lucas, who sat beside me, his small hand clasped tightly in mine. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with trust and hope. It's going to be okay, sweetheart, I whispered, squeezing his hand gently. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, her expression solemn as she delivered the verdict. We find the defendant, Victoria Miller, guilty of willful destruction of property and emotional damages. The gavel slammed down and a collective gasp filled the room. Victoria shot up from her seat, her face contorted with rage. This is a joke, she screamed, her voice echoing through the courtroom. That house was mine. You can't do this. The judge remained unmoved, his voice firm as he ordered, "Bailiff, remove the defendant." Victoria thrashed and screamed as she was dragged away, her eyes wild with fury. But it didn't matter. We had won. I turned to Lucas, a smile spreading across my face as I took his hand in mine. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice filled with relief and gratitude. "We won." As we left the courtroom hand in hand, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. But there was also a deep sadness, a profound sense of loss. The family I had once known was gone, shattered by betrayal and greed. But in its place, a new family had emerged, one built on love, trust, and unwavering loyalty, and that was worth fighting for. In the days that followed, the reality of our victory began to sink in. Victoria was ordered to pay damages and was forbidden from having any contact with Lucas or me. Elizabeth, too, faced the consequences of her actions, her relationship with us forever altered. But despite the turmoil, there was a sense of peace that settled over our lives. We had fought for justice and we had won. And with that knowledge, we began to rebuild, ready to face whatever challenges. The weeks following the trial were a whirlwind of emotions and changes. The Seattle skyline, once a familiar backdrop to my life, now felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Lucas and I found ourselves in a new chapter, one filled with hope and the promise of a fresh start. Our new home was a cozy, modern house nestled in a quiet neighborhood, far from the memories that haunted our old one. The walls were adorned with Lucas's artwork, and the shelves were filled with new books and carefully curated dinosaur figurines, each one a testament to our resilience and the love that bound us together. I watched Lucas as he played in the backyard, his laughter filling the air. He looked happier, more carefree than he had in months. The shadows that had once darkened his eyes were gone, replaced by a spark of joy and curiosity. I knew that we still had a long road ahead of us, but seeing him like this gave me the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I stood there watching him, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us to this point. The betrayal, the pain, the fight for justice, it had all led us here to this moment of peace and contentment. And though the road had been difficult, I knew that it had been worth it. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Lucas looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, do you think Aunt Victoria is sorry for what she did?" he asked, his voice soft and curious. I paused, considering my words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But what's important is that we learn from this experience. We learn to stand up for ourselves and to protect the things that matter most to us." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Like my dinosaurs," he said, hugging his favorite T-Rex toy to his chest. I smiled back, ruffling his hair gently. "Exactly, sweetheart. Like your dinosaurs." As the days turned into weeks, we settled into our new routine. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the challenges and triumphs of my tech startup. The office became a sanctuary, a place where I could channel my energy and passion into something productive and meaningful. But it was the moments with Lucas that truly filled my heart with joy. We spent our evenings exploring the city, visiting museums, and indulging in our shared love of dinosaurs. We laughed, we learned, and we grew together, our bond stronger than ever. One sunny afternoon, as we strolled through the park, hand in hand, Lucas looked up at me with a serious expression. "Mom, do you think we'll ever see Aunt Victoria and Grandma again?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and concern. I took a deep breath, considering my response. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But what I do know is that we have each other, and that's enough. We have our own little family, and that's what matters most." He smiled, his eyes shining with happiness. "Yeah, you're right," he said, squeezing my hand tightly. "We have each other." As we continued our walk, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the journey that had led us here. The pain and betrayal had been difficult, but they had also taught us valuable lessons about love, loyalty, and the importance of standing up for what we believe in. And though the future was uncertain, I knew that as long as we had each other, we could face whatever challenges came our way. Together, we would continue to grow, to learn, and to love, our bond unbreakable and our spirits unyielding. In the quiet moments, as I watched Lucas sleep or listened to his laughter fill the air, I found myself reflecting on the nature of family and forgiveness. I wondered if I would ever find it in my heart to forgive Victoria and Elizabeth for their betrayal, or if the wounds they had inflicted were too deep to heal. But As I pondered these questions, I realized that the answers were not as important as the journey itself. The path to healing and growth was a personal one, and it was okay to take my time to explore my feelings and to come to my own conclusions. And so, with an open heart and a mind full of possibilities, I looked to the future, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. For Lucas and me, the journey was just beginning, and we were ready to face it together, hand in hand, with love and courage guiding our way.